Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. TGIF everybody, today's Friday, and this week we have with us Chuck Durfee. Hey Chuck, welcome back.
Hi, I can't believe it's already Friday. I'm really excited. I'm thinking about the weekend.
Indeed, it is already
First, we have
Friday.
a podcast episode, right?
Happy Friday, everybody.
Yeah.
So Chuck is actually an engineering lead. Therefore, we're going to take a slightly different perspective to the Friday episode, where we usually would discuss what makes it great and some anti-patterns related to the product owner role. Today, we're going to focus on the Scrum Master from the engineering leadership perspective. First, we'll talk about a bad example or an anti-pattern, and then we'll talk about what a great Scrum Master looks like. So first, let's dive into that anti-pattern, Chuck. Share with us what might be potentially the worst Scrum Master anti-pattern you've witnessed in your career.
Wow. I was thinking about the story we were talking about yesterday a little bit, and we were talking about how Scrum Masters and development leaders work together. One time that can be particularly onerous that Scrum Masters don't work out so well is when they are very dogmatic about their process. It is very easy, especially for newer Scrum Masters, to think that if they implement the process, sort of by the book, or that they must include certain aspects of whatever framework they learned that they're trying to implement, that those are the only ways to success. I think many of us who have had time with Agile know that it's part of the interesting piece of being a Scrum Master is finding out how to bring Scrum alive on your particular team, in your particular circumstance, in your particular place. And Scrum Masters who are unwilling to be flexible tend to run into problems when reality hits.
Do you have an example of what that could look like from your perspective as a dev manager? Like where could this dogmatism kind of bump against what you think would be best for the team overall?
Sure. As you can tell, I hadn't fully thought about that part of the question. There was a Scrum Master that I am thinking about who, this was a time when I had multiple teams, so that was part of the solution to this, but one of them was a fairly new Scrum Master. Actually, a lot of people on this team were fairly new, and they wanted to go through a story point exercise, and they wanted to go through it a very specific way, and it was causing some of the senior developers in the group to become frustrated because they had the experience to see where this exercise was going, and they could predict the outcome. But the Scrum Master wanted to go through the process with every single story, even though these stories were fairly similar. It was part of my job was to notice this friction. The Scrum Master was facilitating this particular meeting, and I was going from team to team, just kind of observing. And I was able to take this particular Scrum Master aside and talk to them about the impact that I was observing with them and give them some feedback and try to get them to adjust their approach. Does that answer your question, Oscar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. And I love that you mentioned that because, of course, being the author of the No Estimates book, I have a particularly strong dislike for story pointing exercises. I don't stop people from doing them, but I'm definitely not bringing them to teams. In fact, I have done so in the past that if the teams really feel strongly about story points, I say, you go ahead, I'll leave the room because this is no longer productive for me. But, feel free to go ahead with the story pointing exercise. But that's my perspective, and I wrote about that in the book. So those that want to read can look at it. But coming back to your way of tackling that, So what I heard you say is that you saw the conflict between what some developers were feeling and what the Scrum Master was trying to push, and potentially that's how I understood it. You saw that the Scrum Master
Yeah.
is pushing this on the team that is not welcoming it, right? Is that how you felt at the time?
Yes. So I was observing the body language of the people in the room, and the senior developers were kind of pulling back, and they were getting less engaged in this process. And the Scrum Master, for whatever reason, was in maybe just facilitating this meeting was a challenge for them, and they weren't paying as much attention to participants. And as I said, they were fairly new, so maybe they didn't have much facilitation experience. I They were fairly new to me as well, so I didn't know what their background, what specific experiences they had there. But I was able to see this particular conflict, and that's when I was able to take the Scrum Master aside.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very practical way to bring up the topic, and in this case, actually tackle it right there in the context, which makes everybody's life much better, including the Scrum Master's life much better. But okay, so that was an anti-pattern, of course, but now we need to talk about what a great Scrum Master looks like from the perspective of an engineering lead like yourself. So Chuck, share
Yeah.
that example with us.
I touched on this a little bit yesterday too about maximizing time and talent. So I'm thinking about a gentleman named Mike Nightingale, who was a Scrum Master for one of my teams. It was actually the first place that I managed that we talked about a few days ago. He was the Boulder team lead, and he was very in tune with what was going on with the other people in the team. He demonstrated some great empathy, not only for all of the people on that team, but his sister team in Munich as well. He was able to notice tension through Zoom calls and start talking to the Scrum Master on that team as well. And we were talking about retrospective formats earlier this week. He was always able to bring one that resonated with the team and brought up an issue that he wanted to try to tackle. And I know that he was doing this very deliberately through my one-on-one meetings with him. He would say, I'm sensing that this person isn't really on board with this new approach, so I want to try to bring them into this more and make sure that their voice is being heard in this conversation so that they can get over this resistance. He actually was able to help me understand some of my role as a new dev manager through the things that he was doing in terms of people management. Although it wasn't HR reporting, it was still, he was helping them grow and develop. So I'm indebted to folks like Mike, and I can name a half dozen other people here too. I've had the blessing of being around a number of people who were really good at their job.
And great example about being aware of what is going on, because one of the difficulties for us as Scrum Masters is after Corona and the lockdowns, when we couldn't see people, and many teams are even today still not having their cameras on. It's very hard to capture that sense of what is really going on with people, because as you said, right, like maximizing time and talent, like we can't help people be at their best if we can't see when they are not, right? And you just gave a very specific example of that person that needed to talk about some of their concerns or even worries before they would be ready to accept a new approach. And that's common. It happens all the time, right? Like sometimes the worries and concerns are very high, and other times they are very low, but they're still there. And when we tackle those, when we allow teams to express themselves and team members to express themselves, then they are ready to accept things, right? Like, and if they are not allowed to talk, to express their perspective, it's very hard for them to get over that resistance hump.
It's very true. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about is the Scrum Master responsibility of communicating with stakeholders. And so I was thinking about a person named Brooklyn. They are extremely good at talking to all different kinds of stakeholders and explaining what's going on with their teams. That's another key piece that I just realized that we haven't talked about all week, that Scrum Masters need to be able to communicate not only to their dev manager or their product owner, but there are other stakeholders who are waiting for the software that they need to make sure that the team isn't being interrupted by requests for status or other work. So I always have a soft spot in my heart for Scrum Masters. It's a really challenging position.
Absolutely. And we learned so much already about the role of the Scrum Master from the dev manager engineering lead perspective. Chuck, it's been a pleasure to have you here this week. But before we go, do share with us, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Ooh, that is an excellent question. These days, I'm a little bit in between social media outlets. So I would recommend reaching out on LinkedIn would probably be the best place right now. I am in the midst of, in the background, launching some new stuff. We were just talking about during a break that I have a podcast. I'm looking at trying to resurrect that in some form. So that would be a good way to engage with me, but it's not quite ready for prime time yet. So I'd look for that.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to the podcast as it was before the new changes come in. We'll put the link there on the show notes. And of course, we'll link to Chuck's LinkedIn page. Chuck, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
I've really enjoyed this, Vasco. Thanks very much.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast host, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. So join us at scrummasterpodcast.com and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more full week of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.